The air in the squad car was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ozone, a common perfume for the graveyard shift in the city's forgotten North District. Detective Elias Thorne, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the fatigue of 9 years on the job, tapped a nervous rhythm on the steering wheel. Beside him, Officer Maya Reyes, a bright, sharp rookie whose idealism hadn't yet been completely eroded, adjusted the volume on the police radio. It was 2:17 a.m. A night like a black velvet shroud had fallen over the industrial wasteland they patrolled. Nothing moved except for the occasional gust of wind rattling the broken windows of abandoned warehouses. "Anything interesting, Maya?" Thorne grunted, taking a slow, painful sip of his nearly cold coffee. Reyes shook her head, her gaze fixed on the glowing panel. "Just the usual. Drunk tank chatter, a domestic dispute near the docks, and that weird, intermittent static we've been getting." Thorne frowned. "The static?" "Yeah. It's been happening for a week now. Sounds like a faulty transmitter." "No, sir," Reyes corrected, her voice low. "It doesn't sound like a fault. It sounds intentional. Like a whisper trying to cut through a wall of noise." As if on cue, the radio crackled violently, overriding the low hum of the dispatcher's voice. It wasn't the white noise of a bad signal, it was a rhythmic, almost mechanical pulse, followed by a sound that made the hairs on Thorne's arms stand up. It was a deep, guttural sigh. Long, wet, and undeniably human. Both officers froze. The sound was too clear, too close. Did you hear that, sir?" Reyes whispered, her hand hovering over the radio's volume knob. Thorne swallowed hard. "Yeah. Switch channels. Now." Reyes quickly toggled through the frequencies. Patrol 1, Patrol 2, even the city services band. The sigh was gone, but the persistent, rhythmic static, the whispering static, remained, a low, unnerving buzz that seemed to vibrate the metal frame of the car. "Check the log," Thorne ordered, pulling the cruiser over abruptly next to an overgrown, unmarked access road. That wasn't a standard frequency or code. "See if any other unit reported interference, or if anything was reported missing around this frequency lately." Reyes pulled up the electronic log and scanned through the past 72 hours. Her fingers stopped scrolling. "Sir, there was a missing persons report filed 3 days ago, right in this sector. A radio technician named Silas Kent. He worked for a private infrastructure company, maintaining the cell towers and satellite equipment out here. His wife reported him missing after he failed to return from a maintenance run." She pointed to the log's details. "The last known ping from his company-issued radio was registered at this specific access road. And the frequency of his comms rig was the same one that the static has been hitting." Thorne's tired eyes narrowed. A maintenance technician disappearing in a derelict industrial zone wasn't unheard of, but the coinciding radio anomaly was a hook too sharp to ignore. "Let's take a look. Grab the spotlight in your vest, Reyes. Kent didn't just walk off the face of the earth, and whatever we just heard on that radio wasn't background noise." As they stepped out of the squad car, the oppressive silence of the district returned, broken only by the low, incessant SHHH of the radio's static leaking from the cruiser. The forgotten access road was barely visible, swallowed by weeds and shadow, leading deeper into the heart of the abandoned zone, a place the city had warned people to simply avoid. Reyes shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization that the missing man, Silas Kent, wasn't just near the source of the radio noise. He might have become the noise. Thorne drew his sidearm. "Stay sharp, Maya. Something about this feels less like a crime and more like a discovery." The beam of Reyes's heavy-duty flashlight sliced through the suffocating darkness, illuminating the access road. It wasn't asphalt, just crushed stone and mud, leading to a shallow rise about a quarter-mile off the main drag. "The air is dead out here," Reyes observed, pulling her service pistol. I don't hear anything. Not even crickets. Thorne, his own weapon held low and steady, nodded grimly. That's the North District for you. But you're right. It's too quiet. As they reached the rise, the objective became horrifyingly clear. Perched atop the small hill, against the backdrop of the starless sky, stood a behemoth of twisted steel, a decommissioned, 50-year-old radio transmission tower. Its structure was skeletal, rusted crimson, with dozens of unused antennae jutting out like broken bones. Silas Kent's file said he was servicing a repeater unit in this sector, Thorne murmured. Looks like we found his workplace. Reyes swept the light over the base of the tower. The ground was littered with trash and industrial debris, but near the rusty access gate, the beam caught something metallic and out of place, a faded yellow, company-issued maintenance van. The passenger window was smashed inward, and the driver's side door hung open, revealing an empty cabin. The van, Reyes said, her voice strained. But no signs of forced entry on the gate itself. Thorne approached the gate, noting the thick, padlock chain, solid and undisturbed. He didn't drive in here, he drove to here, then left the vehicle and went over or under the fence. Check the ground, Maya. Reyes, shining her light at the base of the fence line, let out a sharp gasp. The weeds were pressed down near the bottom of the chain link, indicating passage, but that wasn't what caught her breath. Tucked against the wire, half buried in the soil, was a small, cylindrical object. It was a plastic-cased voice recorder, the kind used for documenting repairs and checks. Sir, look, Reyes said, picking it up gingerly with a gloved hand. The indicator light was a faint, stubborn red. It was still recording. Thorne knelt beside her, his breath held tight in his chest. Play it. Keep the volume low. Reyes hit the playback button. At first, there was nothing but the sharp whoosh of wind, then the distinct sound of boot leather scraping on metal, climbing. Suddenly, a voice, clearly Silas Kent's, came through the tiny speaker. It was shaky, but professional. Log entry 473, date, October 26th, final inspection of the old North Tower repeater. Signal integrity is unusual. Getting heavy white noise spike on the 5.1 band. Could be a short. Climbing to the third platform to check the main line. A moment of silence, only the wind and the metallic clink of his tools. Then, the sound of his breathing changed. It became faster, shallower. Okay, I'm up. The line looks fine. Clean as a whistle. But, the noise isn't coming from a short. It's coming from the tower itself. It's not static, it's rhythm. A pause, longer this time. On the recording, the faint, low SHHHSHHHSHHH static they'd heard in the cruiser began to creep into the background. Wait. Hold on. The source, it's a secondary antenna. A homemade rig. Jury-rigged into the power flow. And it's radiating. Radiating, what? Kent's voice was now a panicked whisper. God. No. The current is pulsing. It's not transmitting radio waves. It's vibrating something in the air. Something heavy. I hear it now. It's moving. It's above me. Then came the sound that made Reyes drop the recorder, only for Thorne to catch it an instant before it hit the dirt. It was the same sound they had heard on the police band, the wet, deep, resonant sigh. But this time, it was followed by a chilling, wet slithering noise, like heavy fabric being dragged over damp steel. Silas Kent didn't scream. He only managed one word, his voice utterly broken by terror, before the tape abruptly cut to only the overwhelming, pulsing static, hungry. Thorne looked up at the tower, a grotesque silhouette against the night sky, his face pale and set. Whatever that thing is, it was using the tower as a giant speaker, Thorne said, his voice flat. It broadcasted its meal. Now we know what we're looking for, Maya. And we know it's still here. He looked back toward the cruiser, where the radio still buzzed with the whispering static. Silas Kent recorded his own ending. And now we have to climb up to where he was taken. Thorne clipped a tactical light onto his shoulder strap, the harsh beam cutting through the dense layer of shadow clinging to the tower's lattice work. Reyes was busy checking the carabiners on the emergency rope kit they always carried for securing crime scenes on difficult terrain. Now, it was their lifeline. The rungs are rusted to hell, Reyes, Thorne warned, testing the lowest metal step. It groaned under his weight. Climb slow, test every step. We're going to the third platform, that's where Kent said he was. Understood, sir, Reyes replied, her voice taut with adrenaline, but professional. I'm going to transmit our status to the dispatcher, just a quick entering high-risk structure message. Standard procedure. No, Thorne said, sharply. He reached out and lightly pressed the emergency transmit button on her radio, silencing it. No communication until we're back down. You heard that sigh. If that thing can use Kent's rigged frequency, it can hear the dispatcher. We're going silent, Maya. We don't want to broadcast our presence. Reyes nodded, swallowing her protest. The thought of their frantic whispers being heard and answered by whatever lurked above was enough to make her stomach churn. Thorne started the climb first, moving with the practiced, careful economy of a man who had spent years navigating dangerous spaces. The ascent was a symphony of metallic suffering, creaking, groaning, and the faint, unsettling vibration that was always present, the constant, low-frequency hum of the whispering static. Seemingly emanating from the structure itself, they reached the second platform, a rusted cage the size of a small room, without incident. Thorne paused, shining his light around. The area was empty, save for pigeon droppings and discarded wiring. One more level, he whispered, looking up. The third platform was about 30 feet above them, a black geometric shape dissolving into the moonless night. As they resumed the climb, Reyes felt a shift. The higher they went, the louder the shhh of the static became. It stopped sounding like noise and started sounding like breathing. Sir, Reyes hissed, pointing her light down the length of the metal ladder. Look! Trailing down the rungs they had just used was a dark, viscous streak. It wasn't the consistency of oil or sap. It was thick, glistening, and looked freshly deposited. Slime, Thorne muttered, running his thumb over the substance. He pulled his hand back, staring at the residue in his light. It had a strange, slightly metallic odor, like blood mixed with ozone. It's fresh. Whatever it is, it passed this way recently. He looked up again, his heart hammering against his ribs. The static was a low roar now, filling their ears and vibrating the bones in their heads. Then, the static broke. It wasn't the deep sigh this time. It was a rapid, high-pitched chittering sound, a quick sequence of clicks and guttural, wet pops, like heavy rain hitting warm water. It was coming from the platform directly above them. Reyes gasped, tightening her grip until her knuckles turned white. It knows we're here. Thorne reacted instantly, pushing himself flat against the tower leg and plunging them both into shadow. Silence. Move slow, Reyes. We are not retreating. We need to see what Kent built. That rig is the key. As they held their breath, they saw it. A dark, serpentine shape began to descend a few feet above them. It was thick and heavy, like a rubber industrial cable, except it was wet and moved with a terrifying intelligence. It paused, dangling, and then slowly began to retract upward, but as it pulled away, the end of the cable brushed against a piece of loose aluminum flashing on the tower. The light from Thorne's shoulder clip caught it just for a split second, revealing the tip of the shape. It wasn't a cable. It was covered in a slick, mottled skin, and it ended not in a point, but in a horrific cluster of smaller, needle-like protrusions, a disturbing facsimile of a mandible that seemed to be sucking at the air. They waited in suffocating terror until the slithering sound faded completely. Thorne's whisper was barely audible. "Let's go." Fast, but silent. They finished the final climb, adrenaline overriding their fear of heights. They scrambled onto the third platform and immediately dropped behind a massive junction box, weapons aimed and ready. The platform was a disaster. Tools, wires, and parts were scattered everywhere. And there, near the edge, was the homemade rig Kent had described. It was a crude, complex amalgamation of salvaged radio parts, copper coils, and a glowing, unstable battery pack wired into the main power conduit of the tower. It hummed violently, but Reyes's light didn't focus on the rig. It focused on the center of the platform. There, tethered to the main support beam with thick, wet strands of that same viscous slime, was a cluster of objects. Tools, a radio headset, and a heavy-duty climbing harness. All of them were completely empty. The harness. Reyes breathed, her voice cracking. Silas Kent, he didn't fall. He was taken right out of his harness. Thorne moved his light to the ground, searching for any final, gruesome sign. Instead, he saw something scratched into the rusty metal of the platform floor, near where Kent's equipment lay. It was written in a thick, dark, coagulating fluid. I am the feedback. As Thorne read the words, the humming rig exploded in a blinding flash of green light and smoke, and the static that had been their constant companion suddenly cut off. I am the dead. Echoing silence, a wet, heavy weight slammed down onto the platform above them. The deafening crack of the exploding repeater unit was instantly replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Then came the sound from above, a wet, heavy thud that shook the entire steel platform, followed by the scraping noise of multiple heavy limbs on the metal directly above their heads. Down. Move! Thorne roared, shoving Reyes toward the ladder hatch. The air on the platform above them, the fourth level, directly beneath the largest antenna array, seemed to warp. Thorne could see a distortion in the ambient light, a massive, indistinct shadow that seemed to breathe and shift, absorbing the little light that reached it. Reyes scrambled down to the hatch, her eyes wide with terror, but her training kicking in. "I can't see it, sir." "What is it?" "It's big, Maya. It's goddamn too big." Thorne yelled, scrambling backward toward the junction box where the rig had been. He risked one look at the remnants. The components were smoking wrecks, but the main power cable, a thick, braided line running to the tower's core, was still intact, severed only at the junction point. He suddenly understood. The rig wasn't transmitting messages. It was generating a frequency, a resonance. Silas Kent hadn't been broadcasting a message, he had been anchoring something. The frequency. That static was holding it in place, keeping it tethered to the radio waves. Thorne realized, the horror of the discovery settling cold and heavy in his stomach. When the rig blew, it severed the anchor. Now it's solid. And it's coming for the source of the shock. A section of the ladder above their heads began to rattle violently. The serpentine appendage they had seen earlier dropped down, thicker now, its slick, wet skin catching the light. It was followed by two more, each tipped with that hideous mandibular cluster, probing the air like blind, ravenous snakes. "Cover me, I need to cut the main line," Thorne yelled. If the main power line was still feeding the creature something, he needed to cut it. He pulled the heavy-duty bolt cutters from their utility belt. "Sir, wait." The voltage, Reyes began, but Thorne was already swinging the cutters. He lunged toward the smoking wires, but one of the appendages dropped with terrifying speed. It wrapped around the junction box just beside his head and squeezed. The steel buckled and shrieked under the immense, biological pressure. "It's blocking the path," Reyes cried, firing 2 quick rounds from her pistol. Crack crack, the slugs ricocheted off the appendage, but not without effect. A gout of the viscous, metallic slime sprayed outward, and the thing recoiled with a terrible, high-pitched screech, a sound that was pure feedback, ripping through the air. Now, Thorne. Go! Thorne brought the heavy cutters down on the thickest remaining wire. Snip, sparks erupted, but the main line was severed. The vibrating hum that had plagued them since they arrived vanished completely. In that instant, the creature above them reacted. It was no longer probing or searching, it was enraged. The heavy mass began to move toward the center of the platform. The scraping sound intensified, accompanied by wet, ragged exhalations. Get down the ladder, Reyes. Go! Thorne shouted, tossing his spent cutters aside and sprinting for the hatch. Reyes was already halfway down the external ladder. Thorne plunged after her. He looked up just as he scrambled over the edge. For a split second, his light beam caught the creature as it moved into the gap, drawn by the heat and movement. It wasn't a cohesive monster, it was an organism constantly wearing the static. Its body was a mass of undulating, gray-black matter, constantly shivering at an impossible speed. But what was truly sickening were the eyes. Dozens of tiny, milky white eyes embedded randomly across its surface, like pearls pressed into mud, all staring at him. And in the center, where a mouth should have been, was a horrifying echo of Kent's voice recorder, a gaping orifice lined with serrated bone, whispering the final, resonant word feedback. Thorne dropped, blindly hitting the rungs. They descended the last 30 feet in a terrifying blur, ignoring the rust and their fear of falling. As they hit the ground, the tower groaned, and a sound like a wet avalanche began to cascade down the steel structure above them. They didn't stop until they reached the squad car, slamming the doors shut. Drive! Drive! Reyes screamed, her pistol shaking in her lap. Thorne floored the gas pedal. The cruiser spun gravel and shot down the access road. As they sped away, Reyes looked back at the towering silhouette. In the faint glow of the distant city lights, the tower seemed to be moving. Not swaying, but shifting. And from its highest antennae, a new sound began to emit, thin and sharp, carried on the night wind, the sound of crying. Detective Thorne drove the patrol car with reckless speed, the tires squealing as he hit the main road. The air inside the car felt heavy with ozone and the stench of metallic slime that still clung to their clothes. Only once they were several miles away, merging back toward the city grid, did Thorne finally slow down. Reyes leaned forward, her face buried in her hands, trying to regulate her ragged breathing. Sir, we have to report this. We need backup. Containment. Thorne gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Report what, Reyes? That we saw a 60-foot mass of whispering slime and eyes that each radio technicians? We'd be desk-bound, labeled unfit for duty, and they'd send a hazmat team to clean up the rust and call it a chemical spill. He glanced at her, his expression grim. The key isn't containment, it's understanding. That thing was anchored by a signal. It was communicating, feeding, or something via that frequency. We need to know what Silas Kent was doing before he disappeared. They returned to the precinct just as the sun was hinting at dawn, casting long, sickly shadows across the empty bullpen. Thorne immediately headed for the computer terminal and pulled up everything on Silas Kent. Kent wasn't just a maintenance tech, Thorne muttered, scrolling through private forums and archived data. He had a background in theoretical physics and acoustics. Dropped out of a PhD program 10 years ago, went quiet, and resurfaced as an infrastructure tech. Reyes, still shaken but focused, reviewed the missing persons file. His wife mentioned he was obsessed with old radio infrastructure. Said he believed the abandoned North District Tower was a unique acoustic resonator capable of picking up signals beyond the visible spectrum. Thorne stopped scrolling at an image, a crudely drawn diagram Kent had posted in an obscure online forum about fringe radio science. It showed the North District Tower with multiple points highlighted, labeled with mathematical symbols. Reyes leaned in. Nabla equals epsilon 0 rho. Wait, that's Gauss's law for electric fields. Standard stuff. But look at this equation here. She pointed to a messy section. This isn't standard EM theory. It looks like he's trying to model the sound of electrical current, treating radio waves as a pressure field. Thorne squinted at the text next to the equation. The universe is full of noise. The deeper the noise, the heavier the sound. I need to find the frequency that makes the heavy sound, the sound of a hidden density. He wasn't trying to fix the tower, Maya, Thorne concluded, tapping the screen. He was trying to use it as an instrument to detect something. He wasn't broadcasting, he was listening. And that thing on the tower, it was the density he found. Reyes felt a chill run down her spine as she remembered the sickening sigh they had heard over the police band. He didn't just find it, sir. He connected with it. And then the monster used his setup to mock us. Or perhaps, to lure us. Thorne ran a weary hand through his hair. Why didn't we see this level of obsession in the initial missing person report? Reyes went back to the written files and found a handwritten note from the interviewing officer. It was tucked away in a subfile, dismissed as eccentric ramblings. Wife reports he took a special book with him. A single, leather-bound journal. He called it his noise Bible and was paranoid about anyone reading it. Last place she saw it was his private workshop. The workshop, Thorne said immediately, pushing away from the desk. He wouldn't have taken that Bible to a routine maintenance job. He took his recorder. The journal is still at his house. We need to find that book. That's where he detailed the how and the why of his terrifying experiment. He looked at Reyes, his exhaustion replaced by a burning, focused intensity. We are officially off the clock, but we are not done. We are going to Silas Kent's house, and we are going to find out how to silence the feedback. The house of Silas Kent was located in a quiet, unassuming suburban neighborhood, a stark contrast to the industrial horror of the North District. It was small, neat, and entirely unremarkable, which made the unfolding situation feel even more unsettling. Thorne and Reyes, using Thorne's old detective credentials to convince the distraught wife they were following a critical lead, gained access to Kent's detached garage and workshop. The workshop was immaculate, almost surgically organized, save for one area, a large workbench littered with soldering irons, circuit boards, and dozens of disassembled radio receivers. The smell of rosin and heated metal hung heavy in the air. This is where he worked out the math, Reyes murmured, looking at a whiteboard covered in Kent's complex equations. Look at this, sir. He wasn't just obsessed with sound, he was obsessed with unheard sound. He drew an analogy between the vacuum of space and the vacuum between radio frequencies. Thorne ignored the math for a moment, his gaze fixed on the workbench. He lifted a heavy, oil-stained drop cloth. Beneath it was a complex device, a sleek, modern, titanium casing containing what looked like a proprietary signal generator. Unlike the jury-rigged chaos on the tower, this was Kent's masterpiece. This is high-grade military spec, Maya. Not something a maintenance tech builds in his garage, Thorne noted, turning the device over. He was working on something far more advanced than just listening to old frequencies. Reyes, meanwhile, had found a small, locked metal locker hidden beneath a stack of obsolete communication manuals. The wife said he was paranoid about a special book, Reyes said, pulling a lock-picking kit from her tactical bag. If he was hiding his notes, they'd be here. A sharp click, and the locker sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst Faraday cage lining, lay a single item, the journal. It was thick, bound in dark, weathered leather, and unnervingly cold to the touch. The noise Bible. Thorne took it from her. The paper inside was yellowed and brittle, covered in frantic, looping handwriting that grew increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. He flipped to a recent page, dated 2 weeks before Kent disappeared, October 10th, success. After months of modulating the pulse width of the residual current in the Old North Tower, I have achieved resonance. It is not a frequency I can hear, but one I can feel. A low, rhythmic pressure, like a distant heartbeat. The density is present. It is heavy, vast, and it is starving. Reyes leaned over his shoulder, reading the next entry, dated only 3 days before the disappearance, October 23rd. The connection is stable. I have been communicating with it. Not through words, but through the pulse. It responds to the modulation of its anchor current. It is ancient, pre-biological. It exists in the moment of discontinuity, the gap between the waves. It speaks in a deep, wet sigh. It calls itself the static hunger. Thorne's jaw tightened. The static hunger. That's what we heard. That's what we saw. He skipped ahead, his eyes scanning the final, terrifying entries, October 25th. I was wrong. I thought I was controlling it, directing the current, but it's using me. It doesn't want to communicate, it wants to manifest. It requires physical density to become solid, to feed. The static is its flesh. The tower is its bone. And I am the final, high-density anchor it needs for full stability. The last entry, a mere scrawl across the page, was dated the day he went missing, October 26th. It is here. I am climbing the tower. I must sever the final current. If I fail, it will become permanent. I must disconnect the anchor. If I cannot, the noise will spread. The city will become its radio. Its flesh will grow where the sound is heavy. Thorne snapped the book shut. The implication was immediate and terrifying. He tried to fix his mistake, Reyes. He went back to cut the line, and that thing, it took him and used his harness as a trap for the next signal anchor, us. Reyes looked. From the book to the pristine, silver signal generator on the workbench. But he wrote that the noise will spread. The city will become its radio. We cut the line, but we didn't destroy it. We just made it untethered and angry. Thorne picked up Kent's advanced signal generator. It was the key to his communication, the heart of his work. Kent said it needed an anchor. He was generating a counter-frequency, a specific pulse width to stabilize the thing. That's why he had to rig on the tower. Thorne weighed the titanium box in his hand. We need to go back, Maya. We need to go back to the North District. But this time, we aren't using our guns. We're using Kent's science. We're going to give the static hunger a new anchor, a permanent one, and then we're going to silence it forever. Thorne and Reyes spent the next 4 hours in the precinct's secure evidence processing room, a place rarely used for anything more exciting than cataloging traffic tickets. They were analyzing Silas Kent's advanced signal generator, using the formulas found in the Noise Bible as a decryption key. Reyes, a former college robotics club member before joining the academy, was the primary technician. The rig he built on the tower was crude, a booster, Reyes explained, tracing the wiring inside the titanium box. This generator, however, is designed for extreme precision. It synthesizes a unique waveform, a counterfrequency that runs perpendicular to standard radio waves. She pointed to a final, elegant equation scrawled inside the back cover of the journal. Fc, T, equals A sin, omega T, E minus T slash tau. This is the damping equation, sir. Kent hypothesized that the static hunger could only manifest in the presence of its specific, rhythmic static. The counterfrequency Fc is designed to disrupt that resonance, essentially making the air unheavy for the creature. Thorne leaned over the equation, his face grim. In layman's terms, if Kent's noise fed it, this noise starves it. More than that, sir, Reyes corrected, her voice serious. Kent believed that if the damping frequency was broadcast at a specific power output, the maximum output of this generator, it wouldn't just starve the creature, it would essentially demanifest it, dispersing its static flesh back into the void it came from. The plan solidified, brutal in its simplicity. They had to get the generator back to the highest point of the North District Tower, amplify the signal, and broadcast the counter-frequency. They needed a powerful, stable amplifier, something the jury-rigged gear on the tower had failed to be. Thorne remembered the North District's infrastructure. There's a utility bunker 10 miles from the tower, Maya. A regional power distribution hub. It's automated and unmanned. It has the massive amplifiers and stable power supply we need. They loaded the generator and their remaining tactical gear into the cruiser. The sun had fully risen, but the daylight did little to dispel the dread. As they drove out of the city and back toward the desolate North District, the police radio, which Thorne had kept off since their escape, began to crackle, not with static, but with faint, intermittent sounds. It was music. Old-time, distorted brass band music, interspersed with bursts of frantic, garbled speech, like dozens of radio stations bleeding into one another. "What is that?" Reyes asked, leaning in. "It's signal bleed," Thorne said, his eyes scanning the road. "But amplified. The static hunger isn't anchored to the tower anymore. It's moving. And everything it touches is acting like a temporary antenna." Suddenly, the music cut out, replaced by a clear, chilling sound, the voice of a dispatcher. "Unit 504, confirm your location. We are receiving reports of intermittent power grid failures and localized signal blackouts in sectors F, G, and H, centered around the North District. Repeat, Unit 504, confirm status." The voice was interrupted by a low, drawn-out sigh that resonated through the police speaker, far clearer and heavier than before. "It's not just in the North District anymore, Reyes," Thorne said, pressing the gas. "It's feeding off the city's power and communication infrastructure. It's spreading its static flesh. We're out of time." They reached the unmanned power hub, a concrete fortress surrounded by high-voltage fences. Using a set of skeleton keys Thorne kept for old secure locations, they breached the fence and then the main bunker door. Inside, the air was hot and loud, filled with the constant thrum of massive transformers. "This is it," Reyes said, setting the generator down near a colossal, cabinet-sized signal amplifier. "We tap into this monster's power, link up Kent's generator, and then race back to the tower to deploy it." As Reyes began the delicate work of splicing Kent's device into the main amplifier array, Thorne stood guard, his pistol drawn. He knew that the moment they activated the counter-frequency, they would be sending out a signal so powerful and jarring, it would feel like a beacon to the thing they were trying to kill. And they would be a long way from the safety of the main road. Reyes worked with furious concentration, her movements precise despite the deafening hum of the transformers surrounding them. She bypassed several complex safety systems, feeding the output of Kent's sleek titanium generator directly into the massive regional signal amplifier. "The power draw is enormous, sir," Reyes shouted over the noise. "This thing is designed to broadcast regional television and emergency services. We're pushing Kent's counter-frequency through a monster-sized speaker." Thorne watched the power indicators on the amplifier climb. The red warning lights were flashing rapidly. "Ready to hit the switch, Maya?" "Ready," she confirmed, stepping back, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. She was holding a heavy, shielded cable, the final link between the amplified counter-frequency and the external antenna array. "We need to drop this cable into the tower's main power conduit at the third platform. It will act as a lightning rod for the counter-frequency, broadcasting the wave directly through the tower's structure." "Then let's go," Thorne said. "Get behind cover after you engage the system. This might be loud." Reyes hit the master activation switch. For a split second, the bunker went completely silent. Every light, every transformer, every hum seemed to vanish. Then, a sound erupted that was not a noise, but a physical force. The counter-frequency was a blinding, pure tone, a high, surgical screech that felt like two pieces of metal grating on the inside of their skulls. The force of it made the air crackle. Dust and debris were instantly sucked from the floor and violently plastered against the walls. Reyes screamed, clamping her hands over her ears. Thorne staggered backward, momentarily blinded by the sheer intensity of the wave. The high-pitched tone wasn't just sound, it was an energy release, and it had an immediate, agonizing effect. Through the ringing in his ears, Thorne heard another sound, a distant, terrified howl. It was the sound of the static hunger, now miles away, being struck by an unseen, agonizing blow. The backlash was instant. The bunker lights flickered violently, then exploded, plunging them into darkness save for the brilliant blue-white corona surrounding the activated amplifier. Suddenly, the high-pitched screech of the counter-frequency was interrupted by a new noise, a monstrous, guttural roar that seemed to be traveling through the earth and the concrete. The roar was followed by a crushing impact on the roof of the bunker. "It knows where we are," Thorne yelled, grabbing the shielded cable. "Reyes, let's move. Now." They raced out of the shattered bunker and back to the cruiser. The air outside was thick with electrical discharge and a horrifying smell of burning meat and ozone. As Thorne threw the cruiser into gear, Reyes looked back at the power hub. The high-voltage fence was visibly vibrating, glowing faintly blue. The top of the concrete bunker was cracked, with thick, metallic-looking slime already oozing down the side. "It's moving faster than we are, sir. The counter-frequency isn't just hurting it, it's provoking it," Reyes shouted. "Then we have to get to the tower before it does." Thorne accelerated, pushing the police cruiser faster than he ever had. The drive was terrifying. Every mile they traveled, the environmental effects intensified. Streetlights shattered as they passed, and the low-frequency hum of the city's power lines went silent. When they sped past a small, abandoned park, Thorne glanced over and saw that the air around a thick, old oak tree was visibly shimmering and distorting, a localized pocket of static flesh. Finally, they reached the turnoff for the North District, the rusted silhouette of the transmission tower looming ahead in the early afternoon gloom. "Ready the cable, Reyes," Thorne instructed, turning off the engine. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the faint, high-pitched thrum coming from the portable generator in the trunk, the active core of the counter-frequency. They grabbed their gear and started running toward the tower's base. They could already hear the creature's sound, not the whisper, but a continuous, tearing, desperate weeping sound, like 1,000 pieces of broken glass being ground together. They reached the base. The heavy maintenance van was gone. The ground was churned up, and the chain-link fence was peeled back and ripped open, as if a giant hand had simply clawed its way through. Thorne looked up at the skeletal tower. It wasn't merely standing anymore, it was shaking. "It's climbing its own bone, Maya. It's coming to defend its nest," Thorne said, pointing to the thick, slick streaks of slime already coating the lower rungs of the ladder. "We go up, and we go now. We have about 3 minutes before it reaches the third platform." Thorne and Reyes began their final ascent, the shielded cable spooling out behind them. This time, there was no pretense of caution. It was a desperate race against a physical impossibility. The static hunger was enraged and actively scrambling down its home. The creature's movement was terrifying. It wasn't just slithering. The metal structure of the tower groaned and shrieked as sections of its rusted lattice were warped and twisted by the sheer bulk of the descending mass. "Third platform, Reyes. Don't look up. Just climb," Thorne bellowed, climbing immediately behind her, his service weapon holstered as both hands were required for the ascent. The smell intensified immediately, the horrible mix of metallic blood and ozone that burned their throats. The slime was everywhere now, dripping from the rungs, making their grip tenuous. As they reached the second platform, the creature's weeping roar intensified, accompanied by a sound like tearing fabric. The sound of its own unstable, static flesh ripping itself apart in its haste. "It's moving too fast, sir," Reyes yelled, pausing for a desperate breath on the second platform. "We have maybe 60 seconds. We take the chance." Thorne grabbed the heavy spool of cable. "You focus on the final connection. I'll draw its attention." They reached the third platform. The scene was the same as before, the shattered remnants of Kent's rig, the scratched message, and the evidence of Kent's final, horrifying moments. Reyes immediately moved to the point where the main power conduit, the largest, thickest cable, had been cut. She had to splice the shielded cable into that main line. "I need time, sir. This splice has to be solid, or the counter-frequency won't transmit properly." Thorne looked up. He could see the dark, rippling underside of the creature's mass beginning to spill over the edge of the fourth platform, like a tidal wave of living shadow. Dozens of those sickly white eyes were focused directly on them. "You have 10 seconds, Maya." Thorne unholstered his pistol and fired 3 rapid shots straight up into the approaching mass. Crack. 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 The bullets did nothing to the creature's flesh, simply disappearing into the undulating mass. But the impact of the sound and the heat of the muzzle flash was enough. The creature stopped its descent. Its weeping stopped. It let out a focused, silent, deafening screech of pure feedback. The sound was so intense it felt like a hammer blow to Thorne's head, nearly knocking him off the platform. The creature began to descend again, faster now, a black, viscous tongue, thicker and more horrifying than the mandibular appendages, shooting out and wrapping around the support beam directly next to Reyes. "It's on us, sir." 3 seconds. Reyes cried, blood dripping from her ear where the sonic feedback had burst her eardrum. Thorne emptied the remainder of his magazine into the nearest part of the creature's mass, aiming for the cluster of white eyes, hoping to disrupt its perception. Crack. 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 The creature didn't recoil, it advanced. The long, black appendage coiled, drawing its main body closer to the platform. "Now, Reyes!" Thorne screamed, dropping his empty pistol and diving toward the edge of the platform to create a distraction. Reyes slammed the final clamp shut, completing the connection between the massive amplifier, miles away, and the tower's core conduit via the shielded cable. The heavy cable running down to the ground suddenly began to vibrate violently. "Connection secured. We're live." At that instant, a visible wave of pure, blue energy shot up the cable and into the tower's metallic skeleton. The counter-frequency hit the static hunger. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The creature's mass, which had been black and wet, suddenly glowed with an internal, burning green light. Its terrifying form became violently unstable, shivering and fragmenting. Its silent screech turned into a high-pitched, echoing wail of pure, overwhelming pain that reverberated across the entire district. The static hunger was being torn apart at its fundamental, resonant core. The high-pitched wail of the static hunger was the most painful sound Thorne had ever experienced. It was the noise of existence being undone. The entire tower was vibrating so violently that both officers had to cling desperately to the cold metal rungs to avoid being flung off the third platform. The creature's massive, pulsating body, moments ago a solid, wet mass, was now tearing itself apart, not physically, but dimensionally. The green glow from the counter-frequency, now coursing through the tower's metallic skeleton like electric blood, was causing its static flesh to become translucent, then smoky. "It's working, sir. The waveform is destroying its cohesion," Reyes shouted, clutching the nearest support beam, her voice raw. But the creature, in its agony, wasn't passive. It was fighting the disconnection. It gathered the remaining bulk of its form and slammed it against the tower's core beam, shaking the structure with the force of a small earthquake. Then, with a desperate, final effort, the black, serpentine appendage, the one wrapped around the nearby support beam, snapped taut. It coiled around the delicate junction where Reyes had spliced the shielded cable into the main power conduit. "It's attacking the connection," Thorne yelled. "It's trying to sever the anchor." The appendage began to squeeze, and the metal of the cable clamp groaned, sparking wildly. If the connection was broken, the counter-frequency would cease, and the creature would instantly reform and descend upon them. Thorne, moving on pure instinct and adrenaline, pulled a heavy, rusty wrench from a discarded tool belt left by Kent. He didn't hesitate. He lunged toward the struggling appendage, ignoring the fierce electrical discharge around the splice point. "Get off my tower, you bastard!" Thorne screamed, bringing the heavy wrench down with all his might onto the creature's slick, taut skin where it gripped the clamp. Crunch. The noise was sickening, not of metal, but of dense, compacted cartilage. The appendage recoiled instantly, spraying a torrent of the glowing green slime. It retracted upward, leaving a visibly flattened, oozing wound in its wake. The brief interruption was all the counter-frequency needed. With its defense broken, the static hunger lost control. The terrifying, coherent mass that had clung to the upper tower dissolved. It didn't fall, it shattered, it fragmented into millions of swirling, green-tinged particles of static, smoke, and light. The particles rose in a furious, upward spiral, accompanied by a final, high-pitched sonic boom that felt like the atmosphere itself was ripping. The swirling vortex shot into the sky, creating a colossal, temporary black hole in the clouds above them. Then, with a last, desperate gasp, a sound like every radio in the world tuning out at once, the vortex winked out of existence. Silence returned. An absolute, deep, deafening silence. The tower stopped shaking. The air smelled clean, though still laced with ozone. The massive structure stood cold and still, finally just a dead piece of industrial scrap again. Thorne and Reyes slumped against the railing, their bodies shaking, their ears ringing painfully. They were alive. The static hunger was gone. Reyes slowly pulled herself up. She looked at the spliced cable, still humming faintly with the final remnants of the broadcast. Then she looked down at the platform floor, where Silas Kent had scratched his final message, "I am the feedback." "He wasn't wrong, sir," Reyes whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was the feedback. The connection." Thorne nodded, staring at the empty air above them. "And now, Reyes, we have to deal with the inevitable. We just blew out the regional power grid and destroyed an abandoned transmission tower in a jurisdiction we weren't supposed to be in. The real headache is about to begin." The descent was slow, painful, and silent. Every room felt like a mile, and the metallic slime that had covered the structure was now inert, drying into a brittle, unpleasant dust. They carried the still vibrating shielded cable and the generator, their only physical proof of the night's horrors. When they finally reached the bottom, the sight was surreal. The maintenance van was still gone, the fence was still mangled, and the cruiser looked impossibly clean and normal sitting next to the entrance of the access road. Thorne immediately placed a call to the precinct, keeping the tone even and professional, hiding the sheer exhaustion and adrenaline in his voice. "This is Detective Thorne. We need a cleanup crew at the North District Tower. Immediate structural collapse and a massive power surge. Looks like a major electrical fire and vandalism. We'll need a utility crew and a specialized hazmat unit for the residue." He paused, listening to the dispatcher's frantic replies about the citywide power issues. "Negative, no civilians injured. We found the missing person, Silas Kent," Thorne continued, his voice heavy with the necessary lie. "He appears to have suffered an accident while attempting to salvage copper wire. Massive electrocution. Looks like he caused the feedback that led to the grid collapse. We found his body near the base. Send the coroner, marked as industrial accident." Reyes looked at him sharply, her face pale. "Kent's body was never found." Only his empty harness. Thorne finished the call and turned to Reyes, his eyes hard and unwavering. We established the narrative now, Maya. Kent died trying to steal copper, creating an unauthorized rig that short-circuited the power grid and destabilized the tower. The resulting surge caused the tower to break apart. But the static, the slime, the creature, Reyes whispered, gesturing toward the generator in his hand. We have the evidence. We know the truth. The truth is for us, Reyes. The lie is for the world, Thorne stated, carefully placing Kent's generator into a police evidence bag. If we tell the truth, they'll analyze the slime, the sound recordings, and they'll eventually try to replicate Kent's work. They'll study the counterfrequency, not to destroy the thing, but to try and control it. He looked back at the monstrous, silent tower. That thing is gone, but the physics of it aren't. Silas Kent showed us the doorway. We have to make sure nobody ever opens it again. This generator, the Noise Bible, and our story are going into deep lockup, marked permanently as a unique chemical contaminant and classified industrial sabotage. Reyes hesitated for a long moment, the idealism she carried warring with the terrifying reality she had just survived. She looked at the mangled fence, the evidence of a force that defied physics, and nodded slowly. Understood, sir. Industrial accident. Contaminant threat. No unauthorized access. The next 2 days were a blur of paperwork, interrogations, and cover-up. The official report was signed and sealed by Thorne and Reyes. Silas Kent's disappearance was closed as an electrocution accident, his equipment confiscated. The city attributed the power fluctuations to a catastrophic failure of old infrastructure, conveniently forgetting the weeks of strange static and local reports. Thorne made sure the Noise Bible and the generator were stored in the deepest sublevel of the precinct's evidence storage, an area reserved for the truly unspeakable things the police department occasionally encountered and needed to bury. 2 weeks later, Thorne and Reyes were officially reprimanded for crossing jurisdiction lines and equipment damage, but were quietly given commendations for the quick resolution of the Kent case and preventing further infrastructure damage. They were back on patrol in the newly assigned South District, a brightly lit, busy area far from the shadows of the abandoned North. Everything was normal. Too normal. One evening, driving past a strip mall, Reyes glanced at the radio. The standard chatter was clear, clean, and utterly devoid of static. It's really gone, isn't it? Reyes asked, leaning her head back, finally allowing herself a moment of peace. Thorne didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the road, watching the flow of regular, oblivious life. Yeah, Maya. It's gone. But the noise is still out there. And there are thousands of abandoned towers across this country. And there are always men like Silas Kent, listening for the deep sound. 3 months had passed. Thorne and Reyes were settling back into the mundane, suffocating rhythm of police work. The city had paid for the damage to the power grid, the North District Tower had been officially demolished and cleared, and the incident was slowly fading into bureaucratic memory. Reyes had healed, though the faint ringing in her left ear was a constant, subtle reminder of the counterfrequency's sonic assault. She had learned to appreciate the clean, clear sounds of the South District, the rumble of traffic, the chatter of the city, the absolute lack of any rhythmic static. She sat in the squad car, filling out a routine traffic report, while Thorne was inside a convenience store grabbing coffee. The police radio was on low, emitting the familiar, innocuous voice of the dispatcher. Suddenly, the dispatcher's voice cracked. It wasn't static, it was a pure, focused sound. A sound that only Reyes could hear clearly due to the lasting trauma in her ear. It was a precise, high-pitched weep that lasted only half a second. Reyes froze, her pen suspended over the notepad. She frantically checked the radio frequency display. It was the standard channel. "Did you copy that, dispatch?" she asked quickly into her handset, the dispatcher's voice returned, smooth and normal. Affirmative, Unit 804. Did you have a question about the 10 to 55 on Elm Street? Negative, dispatch. Interference on the line. Just checking. Reyes's heart was hammering against her ribs. She knew what she had heard. It was the exact sound of the static hunger's final scream of agony, but isolated, tiny, and perfectly transmitted. Thorne returned to the car, handing her a lukewarm coffee. What's wrong, Maya? You look like you saw Kent's ghost. I thought I heard something on the radio, sir. Just a brief burst of feedback, she lied, forcing a smile. Thorne's expression darkened slightly. He didn't believe her. He knew she was listening for it, too. It's gone, Reyes, he said, his voice quiet and firm. We disconnected the anchor. We destroyed the core. It's over. Reyes nodded, trying to convince herself. She opened her notepad to continue the report, but her eyes landed on a simple sentence she had scrawled a moment earlier. 10 to 55 on Elm Street. She looked up at Thorne. Where are we, sir? Intersection of 17th and Vine. Why? Elm Street is 5 blocks from here, sir, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. What's on Elm Street? Thorne checked the dispatcher's notes on his onboard screen. 10 to 55, disabled vehicle. No, sir. What is near Elm Street? Thorne pulled up the regional zoning map. His eyes widened. Elm Street ran directly alongside the fenced perimeter of the Regional Satellite Uplink Center, a sprawling complex of massive, active parabolic dishes and antenna arrays. The largest concentration of high-power communications infrastructure in the entire city. Reyes's hands were shaking as she pointed to the radio display. The static hunger's final words, before we destroyed it, were, the city will become its radio. Its flesh will grow where the sound is heavy. She looked at Thorne, her fear absolute. We didn't destroy it, sir. We ripped it from its small, rusted anchor. And when it dispersed, it didn't return to the void. It scattered, and the pieces found the nearest, biggest, most powerful source of heavy sound in the city to reconstitute. Thorne gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the street signs leading toward Elm. The faint, high-pitched weep returned on the radio, this time interspersed with a new sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like 100 tiny mandibles chewing at the air. It was just one piece, Thorne. A remnant, Reyes said, her voice pleading.